Welcome to Wild Side, your wild true crime podcast.
We're your hosts, who are sisters, storytellers, and truth seekers.
I'm Bailey, a therapist who is fascinated by all weird and dark human behaviors.
And I'm Chelsea, an educator here to unearth the facts behind the cases.
We cover true crime because some cases are just too dark to forget,
and others are too wild to ignore.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride. What's up? What's up, Wild Side?
What's happening?
What's happening? What's up? Got some Wild Side in my cup.
I love when Chelsea's like this. She's so fun. Hey, so there's a lot packed into this episode. Okay, so to start it off, we want to give a special thank you to AAL11102018 on Apple for the really sweet review, and we appreciate it so much.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. Our dad has a business partner, friend, and was like, funny story, I'm super into true crime podcasts and checked out a new one, really liked it, and then heard this intro about the host was moving from Germany or something. It's like, this sounds exactly like what you were telling me your daughters do. And Dad was like, yeah, that's their podcast. And she was like, no way, their podcast is like actually good. And he was like, I know, right? Kind of crazy. So that was a cool small world story.
Definitely. And I know we said it a couple of episodes ago, but we have a couple of interviews recorded. I just haven't, we haven't gotten around to finalizing them. And part of it is we do not publish until we get for sure yes from the people that we interview. Even though they usually give us a yes up front, it's still just good practice and good ethics and good courtesy. And so the one that we're about to release is probably the most controversial and the most fascinating one of all. And it has to do with child attraction, sex offending stuff. And it's a researcher in Sweden. Very, very interesting, fascinating stuff. But all that to say, it's coming. We were going to try to squeeze it in this week, but I haven't gotten a for sure confirmation yet. And I don't want to put ourselves in a position where, you know what I mean? We have to rush them to review and all of that stuff. So it is coming. We're getting back. We've got a couple of interviews lined up. So we're on the road to redemption here.
Yeah. So we'll find that homeostasis. We'll find that pH balance. You guys will be fine.
Okay. Before we dive in, I just want to say a quick thing. I watched every news article possible. Chelsea and I both did. And every single one of them pronounces the names in this case differently. So heartfelt apologies if we don't get those correct right away or at all throughout the episode. We do try. But like I said, there's not a lot of reference for it actually being correct. And so, without further ado, you guys, this is the really awful and tragic case of Danielle Marzejka and Seren Bryan. You ready, Chels?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Let's do it. Every crime has a beginning, but not all of them start with blood. Some start with the simple rhythm of everyday life, laughter echoing across diner booths, late night drives with the windows down, excited plans about tomorrow that feel too small to write down but too big to forget. This story is about two teenagers caught in that in-between space where childhood is fading but the future hasn't quite solidified. Danielle Marzejka was 18 years old, stubborn in that she was a teenager, kind of, but technically an adult. but stubborn also in the way she tried to fight to hold on to her family even after life had already taken more from her than it should have. Danielle's boyfriend, Seren Bryan, was 19. He was the yin to her yang, quiet and steady. Friends say he was her anchor, the person who balanced her fire with his calm. Danielle and Seren's lives weren't really notable in any way. They were two young people in suburban Michigan, picking up late shifts, piecing together paychecks, and carrying the weight of family fractures. Just trying to figure out in real time what it means to build a life with someone you love. And maybe that's what makes their story linger in the gut. Because so many of us know a Danielle or Seren. People just like us trying to carve out joy in the margins of a modest life.
Danielle Marzejka grew up in Clinton Township, Michigan, a place defined less by skylines and more by neighborhoods stitched together with the mundane and day-to-day routines. The township itself was a patchwork of modest homes and rows of mobile home communities. It wasn't flashy, but it offered something solid, something predictable, until the first tragedy struck in 2011 when Danielle's mother died of an overdose. As with any death, the loss of the matriarch of the family totally reshaped the household. Suddenly, the children were left to navigate grief and the newly shifting responsibilities. Danielle was just a child, but grief and other family dynamics forced her into roles she shouldn't have had to fill. So clinically, this is known as role strain, when children step into adult responsibilities because pretty much no one else can. For Danielle, that likely meant being part caretaker and more of an adult long before she was grown herself. And then there was Seren. He entered Danielle's life in those fragile teenage years when identity and stability are both up for grabs. It was known that Danielle didn't exactly have a happy home life. Again, her mother had died of an overdose. There were reports that her father was an alcoholic, and she had a tumultuous relationship with her older brother. Seren, though not much more was really reported about his home life, it likely was a similar story to Danielle's. Just out of high school, the two lived together with Danielle's father and her two brothers, Robert, who was the oldest, and her younger brother, Kevin. There, all 5 individuals lived together in a mobile home in Rudgate, Clinton Mobile Home Park. For Danielle and Seren, each other wasn't just comfort, really it was survival. They worked shifts, saved what little they could, and held on to the hope of one day having a place of their own. Their relationship was more than romance. It was a lifeline in a world that kept pulling the ground out from under them. The Marzejka family moved often, sometimes pushed out by eviction, really the kind of instability that leaves family in a constant state of survival mode. In that landscape, Seren became Danielle's anchor, routine, companionship, stability, when so little else around her felt steady. But love alone can't cancel out pressure. When family fracture and outside systems fail to catch them, the tension doesn't fade, it multiplies. And in houses already stretched thin by grief and scarcity, those pressures don't just simmer, they eventually combust.
Now we are settling into August 23rd, 2018, when Danielle Marzejka and Seren Bryan were working a late shift together at their job at National Coney Island with their friend Crescinda Whaley. After midnight, Crescinda dropped the duo off at the Marzejka family home, just like she'd done 100 times before. There was no fights, no drama, no red flags. Just 2 teenagers finishing a long day of work, ready to go to bed. The next day, on August 24th, Crescenda messaged Danielle on Facebook. At about 1 p.m., she sent Danielle a message saying, "Hey, I can't drive you tonight," referring to work. After a few hours, Crescenda messaged Danielle again about 5 p.m., telling her that she, quote, "found you a ride." Then, around 7 o'clock that evening, she sent another message saying that the ride fell through. But the problem was that none of the messages that Crescenda sent to Danielle went through. And this is the big first red flag. For Danielle, she was practically glued to her phone and even carried a charger with her everywhere she went. Undelivered was not her. 2 days later, by the 25th, when the pair had missed their night shift again, that's when big alarms began to spread amongst friends. One friend, Emmanuel Wolf, said he half expected Danielle to pop up online and tell everyone that they were just fine and everyone was being dramatic. But she didn't. Her Facebook went quiet. Silence like that, for someone who lived through her phone, was really concerning. And this is the thing. Silence is often where we miss the earliest signals in cases like this. Missing persons cases involving teenagers or young adults typically trigger stereotypes. They're fine, they ran away, they're being rebellious. That's what we call an attribution bias. We downplay danger by blaming the victim. But Danielle and Seren did not fit the profile. They had steady jobs, they had plans, and deep ties to their families.
I always think that concept is wild. I've watched, obviously Bailey and I we have watched a ton of different true crime documentaries, and that is amazing to me, especially in like the 70s and 80s. It seemed like anytime anything was reported, the police automatically were like, how old are they? Oh, they're 17. Oh, they ran away.
Yeah, even when they were like 14, they'd be like, oh, they're just being rebellious wild children. And you're just like, sir, we have like 9,000 serial killers this decade running around. We should probably pump our brakes and look for these kids.
It really is amazing that so many people, seriously, thank goodness for technology, and thank goodness that I think we're able to better pattern people now. Kind of like with Danielle, where friends automatically knew this is not like her. She is always on her phone.
For sure.
I think that's a blessing. So by this time, Crescenda tried to check on Danielle. She drove to the Marzejka residence and knocked on the door. Danielle's father, Robert Sr., intoxicated, initially refused to let her in, but eventually he did let her in. Once inside, Crescenda noticed that Robert Jr. sat in the living room, calm, saying really very little. She made her way to the room Danielle and Seren shared, and things just felt off. There were pillows missing, a blanket, top sheet tossed on the bed, and the phone charger not by the bed, where it always was. But it wasn't enough to suspect anything like foul play. Danielle and Seren were known to stay with friends, sometimes nights on end, and maybe the two had just lost their phone charger or something along those lines, right? But by the next day, another mutual friend, Allison visited the Marzejka house and decided to search the room more thoroughly. She quickly found Danielle's bag, laptop, purse, and glucose monitor still there, all items that Danielle never left behind, especially being type 1 diabetic. And most haunting of all, the necklaces that had belonged to her late mother, Jill. Those pieces weren't just jewelry. They were her tether to memory. To walk away without them was unthinkable. Now, everyone knew that something was amiss. But within the family, accustomed to chaos and grief, it didn't immediately spark panic. And that reveals something crucial about trauma households. People normalize instability. What looks alarming from the outside can feel inside the family, like just another crisis in a long line. But to her friends, Danielle wasn't just a name in a case file. She was embedded into the community and was loyal to a fault. The person you could count on. That's why her disappearance rippled outward, affecting classmates, coworkers, and neighbors. So they took action. The pair's friend, Crescinda, made her way to the police station to file a missing persons report for Danielle and Seren. But police only allowed her to report Danielle as a roommate, but not Seren, since he was not a relative. It was a collective fear unfolding in real time, waiting for an answer.
Now we're to August 26th, 3 days after Danielle and Seren vanished. Danielle's brother Kevin couldn't ignore it anymore. He knew that something was wrong by this point. So he began to walk through the home and around the property looking for anything that pointed to the couple's whereabouts. There didn't seem to be any forced entry into the house, so he walked out to the shed behind the family's home. As he got closer, the awful smell hit him before he noticed all of the flies at the door. When Kevin tried the lock, the key was gone, so he went to fetch a spare. Back at the house, Kevin told his father about what he had discovered and said that there was something dead inside the shed, but it's probably a wild animal. The two made their way back down to the shed, and Kevin unlocked it and looked inside. Now, initially, there wasn't a clear path to the back of the shed. There was a box spring and a lawnmower that had been shoved in front, blocking the back of the shed. Kevin moved the 2 mattresses and a lawnmower, and along the back he noticed 2 large garbage bags. He touched the outside of one and felt what he thought was an arm or a leg. As the reports go, Kevin and his father debated for about 15 minutes if they should cut open one of the bags. Danielle's father, Robert Sr., was very clearly in shock. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over. "Tell me it's not her. Tell me it's not her." Then they called 911.
When speaking with the 911 operator, Kevin said, "My sister's been missing 4 or 5 days, her and her boyfriend. I think they're in the shed. I'm just scared to open it." The dispatcher said, "We don't want you to touch anything. If it is something like that, there's going to be evidence. We're getting everyone on the way." Within minutes, officers arrived. One of the officers making their way to the shed was on video saying, "That doesn't look normal. We're confirmed. Get everybody out here." It was immediate. There were 2 bodies, their faces sealed in duct tape, bludgeoned and wrapped in garbage bags. So the shed stopped being a family space and became a crime scene. Tape went up, officers moved in, reporters gathered. And with that confirmation, everything shifted. What had been whispers, maybe they ran off, maybe they'll come back, collapsed into one brutal truth. Danielle and Seren weren't missing. They were murdered. They'd been in the backyard all along. The discovery nauseated the family and reverberated through the whole community. Neighbors told reporters they couldn't believe something like this could happen here. But that belief, or a form of collective denial, is an instinct we all have. To believe, not here, not us. But Clinton Township wasn't insulated. It bore the same fractures as countless American towns: addiction, economic strain, gaps in mental health care, and still, the narrative that took hold was one of shock, an unthinkable tragedy.
Kevin's discovery in the shed was just the beginning. Once the bodies were confirmed to be Danielle and Seren, investigators worked from the inside out. literally and figuratively. They started in the shed and moved their way up to the house, in the bedroom where Danielle and Seren would have been safe and where they lived. Under luminol, every wall in their room lit up. The carpet had been scrubbed, the furniture rearranged, sheets swapped out, but the chemicals told the real story. And then came the part that stunned everyone, including the detectives. It wasn't just Danielle's room that held evidence. In Robert Jr.'s room, his supposed refuge, police found blood-stained towels and clothing shoved into corners. It wasn't splash damage. It wasn't an accident. It was transfer. Evidence carried by the killer himself, seeping into his own living space. That turned the investigation from possibility to inevitability. So the question shifted. Not just what happened, but who inside this house could have done it. Investigators began ruling people out, tracing movements, and closing the circle. And almost immediately, the absence spoke louder than presence. Robert Jr. wasn't anywhere to be found. While the police searched the home, he had already vanished. And that absence became their lead. Phone records showed his device at the family home at 10:13 a.m. on August 23rd. By early afternoon, he was calling a cab, then a carpet cleaning company, explaining why the room looked freshly scrubbed to the naked eye. Hours later, he was seen at a Wendy's, then at a Tim Hortons, before being picked up at 5:30 p.m. by his father in the family van. Within days, the same van turned up abandoned all the way in Toledo, Ohio. And Robert Jr., well, he was in disguise, fumbling for cigarettes at a Circle K, then boarding a Greyhound bus under the alias Joshua Bianco. By August 29th, the search ended at the Cincinnati Public Library of all places, but it wasn't Robert as his family knew him. U.S. Marshals found him hunched over a computer game, draped in a cheap blonde wig, sunglasses pulled low, and a baseball cap tugged tight. The disguise was almost laughable, obvious to anyone who would look twice. But that's really the point. Because disguises are not accidents, they're choices. And this choice screamed intent. See, Robert Jr. didn't just want to leave Clinton Township, he wanted to completely disappear. That wig and the glasses and the fake name weren't about madness in the moment. It was about survival, about evasion, about premeditation that stretched beyond the hammer swings into the aftermath. And that's the really disconcerting part, is the escape became as calculated as the murders themselves.
Which is why Robert's history complicates everything. He had a long record of psychiatric instability. Family members had even filed a petition for involuntary treatment back in 2015. He reported hearing voices. His behavior unraveled after the mother's overdose in 2011, yet here he was, boarding buses, hiding under aliases, and trying, however poorly, to vanish. Mental illness does not erase planning. It complicates motive. However, the question of motive would haunt this case from start to finish. When Robert Jr.'s trial finally began in November 2019, more than a year after his arrest, prosecutors told jurors this wasn't a crime of impulse. They laid out the evidence piece by piece, each detail painting a picture of planning and concealment. In Danielle's room, what looked clean to the naked eye told a different story under luminol. Every wall, every inch of carpet, lit up with blood, even beneath a decorative dolly on the TV stand, even under Danielle's makeup kit. I mean, we are talking a literal bloodbath. In Robert's own room, police discovered what he'd tried to shove out of sight: blood-soaked towels, stained clothing, a shirt splattered and shoved in with an Xfinity cable box, and tucked behind the water heater in the closet, the walk-in closet, a roll of duct tape streaked with blood carrying Robert's fingerprints. The shed told its own story. Investigators found pillows, Danielle's glucose needles, her makeup kit, and the fitted sheet stripped from the couple's bed. They found the empty roll of duct tape and another black roll. And they found the weapon itself, a 27-ounce Husky hammer. Forensics closed the circle. Danielle and Seren's DNA was on the hammer head. Robert's was mixed with Danielle's on the handle. The empty tape roll carried DNA from all three, and the fingerprints on the tape, it was confirmed that it was Robert Jr.'s. Then came the medical examiner. Dr. Mary Pietrangelo told jurors the suffocation wasn't, quote, overkill. It was insurance. It was going to happen. Danielle had been struck 7 times in the head, injuries that could have killed her on their own. Seren had 3 blows, not fatal by themselves. His death came from asphyxiation. She explained that it would have taken 1 to 2 minutes for unconsciousness, 3 to 6 minutes for death. Detective Jay Anderson followed with the clinical reconstruction. Danielle, multiple skull fractures, a trash bag cinched over her head, tape over her face, and a loop of tape by her ankles, suggesting she'd been bound. Seren, swaddled in 5 plastic bags, knees forced to his chest, wrists and ankles taped separately and then together, and his mouth and neck cinched tight.
And then there was the timing. Prosecutors told jurors that Robert Jr. struck between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. on August 23rd. Danielle and Seren were still in their sleeping clothes, lying in bed when he entered the room. Neither of them stirred. Neither of them fought back. There were no defensive wounds on either one of them. Prosecutor William Cataldo said, "When he came into that room, that was the end." He added one more detail. Robert hadn't just armed himself with a hammer and duct tape, he had also obtained a shovel, pointing to an abandoned plan to bury the bodies. That meant premeditation wasn't only in what he did, it was in what he prepared for and set aside. Even his discarded choices painted intent. Now, the defense tried to shift the narrative throughout the trial. They leaned hard on Robert's psychiatric history, diagnoses of bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and paranoia. They claimed the killings weren't planned, but an eruption, spontaneous and born of some type of break. They pointed to his short psychiatric hospitalizations over 9 years, barely 3 or 4 weeks total, and his refusal to take medications consistently. But that argument was already undercut. In December of 2018, a competency hearing had actually found Robert Jr. fit for trial. He knew right from wrong, and he could participate in his defense. And you know, this is the paradox at the center of forensic psychology. A person can live with mental illness and still be fully accountable for their actions. The law doesn't weigh mood swings, hallucinations, or fractured grief. It draws a sharp line. Did you know what you were doing? Did you choose to do it? And for Robert Jr., the answer to both of those was yes. The trial itself stretched across 6 days, but the verdict came with astonishing speed. Deliberations began at 2:55 p.m. on a Friday. By 3:33, less than 40 minutes later, the jury returned. Guilty, 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. So the trial was never really about whether or not Robert Jr. committed the murders. That was never in doubt. The evidence was there. It was about whether society would hold him accountable, and in less than an hour, 12 jurors delivered the answer, yes. But trials are never really just about the verdicts. They're also about meaning, how communities frame violence, how jurors, families, and neighbors try to make sense of the senseless. Courtrooms become more than legal arenas. They become mirrors reflecting the categories we already have and the gaps where no categories yet exist.
Because really, courtrooms are never just about guilt or innocence. Really, they're social mirrors. Robert Jr.'s trial reflected more than his actions. It reflected how society frames violence. When a man kills his wife or a boyfriend kills his partner, we have a framework for that. We talk about domestic violence. There are hotlines, shelters, awareness campaigns. But when a brother kills his sister, there's not really a category for that. No, sibling abuse PSAs, no prevention programs, and families rarely ever anticipate it. Communities don't prepare for it. Law enforcement doesn't track it as a distinct pattern. And the data shows how invisible it really is. Siblicide accounts for barely 1% of homicides in the US. That sliver is so rare, it almost disappears in statistics. And because it disappears, we would never build infrastructure around it. The social safety nets that exist for intimate partner violence simply aren't there for siblings. We only respond after the fact when the damage is already irreversible. The absence of framework is why the trial itself unfolded almost like theater. Prosecutors fought to make the brutality legible to jurors. The medical examiner, Dr. Mary Pietrangelo, was asked to tape her own nose and mouth to demonstrate suffocation. There was a fight over autopsy photos. The defense warned they'd inflame the jury. The judge allowed them cropped. Surveillance clips turned into storytelling devices. Robert, casual at Tim Hortons, restless at a Circle K, absurd in his blonde wig, and in one almost surreal moment, prosecutor William Cataldo put on the same kind of wig and hat in front of the jury, mocking the disguise Robert Jr. thought would help him vanish. Cataldo didn't soften his words. This is one of the most gruesome, horrific crimes we've seen. You've seen. He reminded jurors, Seren and Danielle had no defense wounds. They were attacked in their most vulnerable state while they were sleeping. He urged them to reject the defense's plea for sympathy. What sympathy did he show them? What concern did he show them? Even Robert Jr.'s silence became part of the narrative. He sat through graphic photos without reaction, even smirking at an image of Danielle. Prosecutors called it resentment made visible. Jurors saw not just the evidence, but the absence of remorse, and that absence told its own story. At sentencing, the human dimension eclipsed the theatrics. A relative looked Robert in the eyes and said, "You killed the last person who loved you unconditionally." Seren's mother, Diane, described in haunting detail how her son suffocated under tape and plastic bags and how she relives that horror every day. And then Judge James Barnett Jr. spoke. He didn't cloak his words in legal nuance. He said, "You murdered your sister. You're an evil man, and you're going where you belong." That single word, evil, mattered, right? When institutions don't have categories for an act, they fall back on morality. It compresses something complex into something that a community can carry. So this trial wasn't only Robert Jr. on trial, it was a family fractured by grief, addiction, and untreated illness, pulled under fluorescent lights and dissected for strangers to weigh. And it left Clinton Township confronting something they had no language for: what it means when blood turns against blood.
Just 2 months later, on January 14th, 2020, Robert Marzejka Jr. was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His appeal was denied. There was no second chance, no parole hearings, and no possibility of returning to Clinton Township. His story ends behind bars. But what lingers isn't the sentence. It is the mindfuck of what happened. Prosecutors revealed that Robert hadn't just lashed out in rage. He had come prepared. He had purchased duct tape, obtained a 27-ounce Husky hammer, and bought a shovel, part of a plan to bury Danielle and Seren that he ultimately abandoned. Instead, he then turned to concealment, scrubbing carpets until they looked clean. He moved furniture to hide the stains. He changed the sheets, shoved bloody towels and clothing into his room, dragged the bodies to the shed, wrapped in a comforter. Evidence did not suggest that there was any guilt. It tied him to the crime in ways that it could not be ignored. Danielle and Seren's blood on the hammer, his fingerprints on the tape, DNA scattered across clothing, bags, and rolls of duct tape. This was not random. It was deliberate. He chose the weapon, wielded it, and secured the bindings with his own hands, up close and personal.
For Clinton Township, the aftermath was anything but clean. The police tape came down, the shed was emptied, processed, and eventually looked ordinary again, just another outbuilding in a mobile home park. The cameras left, but the community couldn't really return to normal. Neighbors described disbelief, and that disbelief itself, it really is sociological. Working class suburbs cling to a story of safety, telling themselves that poverty, addiction, and untreated illnesses belong somewhere else. But they were already woven into this family's lives. The petition for Robert's involuntary psychiatric treatment in 2015, really was a sign that there were issues, but the systems meant to intervene, they just really never followed through. This wasn't an impossible crime. It was a possible one no one wanted to imagine.
These aren't the behaviors of someone lost entirely to psychosis. They're the behaviors of someone who knows consequences exist and tries, however clumsily, to avoid them. And yet, the nagging question that was left after all of the back and forth of the trial, after the guilty verdicts, and after the life sentence is why? Why did Robert turn on his sister and also take the life of her boyfriend? Prosecutors floated the idea of resentment, that Robert Jr. didn't like Danielle and he was angry at her, but nothing really concrete emerged. He didn't have a manifesto. There was no confession. He just sat stoic and silent. And sometimes, unfortunately, the silence is the most unsettling thing at all because there is nothing that we can get from it.
The only unshakable truth is grief. And maybe that's the hardest aftermath to sit with, that sometimes there's no motive we can hold. We just have blood and tape and silence and memories and a whole bunch of grief.
And that, our dear listeners, is the really awful and tragic case of Danielle Marzejka and Seren Bryan. So, if we just want to sit with this for a second, because there's a lot going on here. Any thoughts, Chelsea, that you have just right out of the gate?
Well, I don't know. Have you been keeping up with the latest attack and murder of the young woman on the train?
Yeah, North Carolina.
The North Carolina incident.
Yeah.
And I feel like you know, so far, as far as they know, the two people didn't know each other. The attacker didn't know his victim. And again, it's just that burning question of why. And I think it just lives in that same boat of, is there a why? Are there some cases where all you're going to get is because it happened, because somebody did it?
Yeah.
And that's hard, right? Like that, nobody likes that. That's why people walk out of theaters, right? Because they're like, this movie sucked. We don't even know why. This is a terrible movie.
Yeah. Yeah. When I have people who come into session for counseling, they so badly want to find the why.
Sure.
Specifically, they want to know, in so many words, they say, I want to know, what screwed me up the most.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I always tell them is, it's like, that's like diving into the rabbit hole into what Alice in Wonderland. It's a trippy adventure, and it's going to change. So what is the reason you view the world this way when you're 16 is going to change by the time you're 23 versus 45, and so on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think the hardest thing as a therapist to help people with is shifting their perspective around the whys. Why did my mom die? Why did my husband, why did he die in a car accident when I was, 10 months pregnant, like 8 months pregnant, or,
Yeah.
And it's hard because as a therapist, you pretty much have to say, I have no idea why. I don't know why. But then helping them find ways that they can, that it's acceptable for them to sit in that, whether it's turning to spirituality or religion or, having a higher power, whatever that may look like, is usually one of the most helpful things. But yeah, I think it's human nature for us to say why. And then when you have something that's just so, like the Kendra Lakari, this is a spoiler alert for all you guys. If you haven't watched the Catfish documentary, you need to skip through this because I'm going to spoil everything. Have you seen it, Chelsea?
Is this the high school one?
Yes. Okay.
Crazy. Lucas, literally, I was like, hey, you're getting home. I have to record with Bailey. And he was like, well, hurry up because we have a documentary that I want you to watch. And he was like, it's this catfish, high school catfish thing. So no, I'm literally going to watch it like the minute we get off from recording this.
Well, I can't spoil it for you, but basically when you have situations at the end that you're just like, what incarnation, what the hell is going on? Why would you do that? It's just, you have to find, I don't know, you just have to anchor into something.
Well, I watched a clip the other day, and I don't even know how I came across it or why I watched it, but it was this interview of this woman who had been a sex worker from the age of 10 years old. Her mother sold her to her pimp right at the age of 10. And that's what this woman grew up in.
So and she's a trafficked child.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like by her own mother.
Oh, yeah.
And again, like I was talking with one of the administrators at our school the other day, and she's really, really strict. She's new and she's amazing, and I really love her. And, she was like, I all of my work background has been in some pretty, rough districts. And so this is why, like, we don't allow girls to stay in the bathroom. Like, we time them to see how long they're going to be in there, or we don't leave them unattended at this age. Like, there's just so much that could happen.
Yeah.
And she was like, which is weird for me to be in this school district because it doesn't happen as much. But in these other school districts, like, that's all they know. They know to fight, they know to steal, they know, it's like, because if their mom or their dad can steal from them to get their fix, get their drugs, get whatever, then that's what they'll do.
Yeah.
And obviously, not everybody's like that. You can't have gross generalizations, but I say that to say I think that's why it's so important for the people who can contribute, whether it be like Bailey being a therapist or us both working in the school districts. We're not perfect people, but I feel like we do have a somewhat of a balance, enough of a balance to be like, hey, let's try to model some better behavior. Does it prevent stuff like this? Not necessarily, but we don't know how many cases it does prevent.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, by being there and being present, it could be, that could literally be a life-changing, life-saving intervention, whether or not you know it.
Yeah. And as far as this case is concerned, I think it's just, there's a lot of unfair circumstances stacked against Danielle and Seren.
Mm-hmm.
And, the way that I cope with it, and I'm not saying it's the healthiest way, but when I look at really messed up cases, I'm just like, yeah, that's fucked. There's nothing we could have done. Dad was an alcoholic, mom was an addict, died of an overdose. These kids are just trying to do the best they can. They're trying to hunker down and find safety. And their brother's a stupid, awful person who, is like the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't know. I think sometimes you just have to, the only place to settle is just radical acceptance, where you're just like, yep, this shit happens and it's shitty, and there's really good things to this life and there's really good people, and then things like that happen, and you just, like, I don't know, that's just how I deal with it.
Well, I don't know, this is probably like worse than how you deal with it. A lot of times in these situations, I catch myself saying, you know what, it's going to happen to all of us. We're all going to die, and nobody gets to not experience that. I hate that they had to experience their death that way, but none of us are going to elude it. And so we're all going to die. It's not like they experienced something that no one else got to experience.
I don't like your way. I don't like your way.
I know, but I literally am just like, well, we're all going to die. Like, I'm sorry that happened to them.
Yeah, but I think most humans have a preference for not dying like a horrible death.
No, I get that, and I agree. Like, I'm not very good at wording all of this in a way that makes it sound like I'm not a complete raging
but it
a-hole.
does. It sounds like ultimately what you're saying is just like a radical acceptance in that
Sure.
we all find ourselves at the end of that dead-end road.
Yeah.
Well, I need you to text me or call me or FaceTime me when you get done watching this fucking documentary. And for those of y'all who are out there, if you have not watched this documentary, you need to do so immediately, and then prepare your memes for the meme wars of, it's just, I can't. If I say anything, I'm gonna give it away. But if you know, you know.
Okay, well, I'll text you as soon as I get finished.
Yeah, because
but
fuck that bitch. That's what I want to say. All right, you guys. Well, as always, thanks for hanging out with us through this wild and crazy ride.
And as always, we'll catch you on the wild side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators.
Hey Wildside Tribe, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Wildside Podcast. Make sure to tune in on Wildside Wednesdays. New episodes will drop each Wednesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We would love to hear from you. So if you have a wild case recommendation, email us at wildsidepodcast@gmail.com. That's wildside with a C. Or share your thoughts in the comments below. As always, if you haven't heard it today, you're loved, you're worthy, and you're valuable. And we'll catch you on the flip side.